Hi, you're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We talk a lot, especially in a church. It's called eschatology. It's the doctrine of final things, the way this world will end. I want to share something that I ran across this week by Jeff Thomas, written in Doug Casey's International Man publication. It's called the Wheatfield Principle. In 1946, Juan Perón was elected president of a prosperous country. The name? Argentina. He promised great social benefits to the common man under what did he call it? Justicalissimo. It's called social justice. This justice was never actually defined, it was just implied. So if you're a common man, the Perón government will favor you over the rich. He demonstrated this through forced wage increases and other benefits. Railroads and utilities were nationalized. That's a fancy word for being stolen from their owners by the government. In addition, extensive but often unnecessary public works projects were undertaken. Work ethic and personal achievement took a back seat to being well connected. Increasingly, success was the result of bribes to government leaders and officials. The overall result of these actions was that the economy sank and the very businesses that were bled to provide largesse given to the common man were no longer able to pay the ever-increasing cost of entitlements. And this led not to an obvious reversal of the socially and economically destructive policies, but to an increased reliance on the military and a growing police state. Constitutional liberties were removed, and any opposition was punished. This is a dictatorship. Although this so-called man of the people campaign promised from Mr. Perón had been welcomed in 1946, by 1955 it became apparent that it had led to such great inflation, it had increased poverty, corruption, and political oppression. And so amid broad public discontent, Mr. Perón was ousted from office. The subsequent government advised the electorate that for the economy to recover, they must accept a loss of entitlements. Such was the payback to recover from the mistakes of socialism. Perón went into exile. But amazingly, he was returned to office by the electorate in 1973, and he died in office the following year. Since that time, Argentina has gone through cycles that have each begun with a new savior, candidate promising larger and larger amounts of benefits from the government, winning the election, then instituting a revised Peronist model. In every case, it would end in inflation, increased poverty, corruption, political oppression 2 or 3 terms later. Then, following the inevitable economic decline, a more conservative administration would be voted in. There would be a brief period of correction, fiscally sound government policies applied, and under such administrations, entitlements would be diminished, and Argentina would begin to return to a sound economic footing. But these periods of responsible governance would rarely last for more than one term, 4 years, before the transition to full prosperity could be completed. The next election would result in a return to the Peronist model. Now, if the above description sounds repetitive and familiar to U.S. citizens over the age of 60 years of age, it is. World War II bled our economy. Republican Dwight Eisenhower set up a system to revive it. After Eisenhower came John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. Kennedy was on track to build on the Eisenhower model when he was killed in office after only 2 years. Then came Lyndon Johnson, the ultra-liberal Southern Democrat. When the race riots of the 1950s and the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King woke the nation up to what Southern Democrats had been doing all these years, Johnson brought us civil rights legislation, welfare, and a war in Vietnam. 2 Republican presidents followed, Nixon and Ford. Ford was just a fill-in at the end. Nixon was good for the economy, but he harbored a fear of being ruined or killed by his political enemies. It was his undoing. Then there was Jimmy Carter, a controller who sought to fashion the U.S. after his own philosophy. With Carter, we got high gas prices, if you could get gas at all. We had lines at the pumps, and we were, you could only get just so much. And we learned how to wear sweaters. He taught us how to do that for when we turned our heat down in the house in the winter to save on oil or gas or whatever. After Carter's one term came Ronald Reagan, who in his second term put the U.S. back on an even keel and a march to prosperity that we had lost and which we deserved. George Bush and Bill Clinton rounded out the 20th century. The cycles of ultra-liberalism have been repeated in Argentina for 73 years with the occasional interruption. The result has been that Argentina, a once highly productive country, has become a banana republic and has remained that way. There have been significant periods of socialism interrupted with brief corrections, attempts to refloat the economy, only to dive one more time headlong into socialism. And yet the Argentine people are, for the most part, educated and industrious. So why on earth does this pattern continue after so many blatant failures? Well, the answer is human nature. Once a people have decided to cease acting responsibly, once they have decided to pass the decision-making to the government, they slide into a childlike existence in which they cease to bother looking for any farther into the future than their next government handout. Once a people have become this short-sighted, they're easily manipulated into forgetting the pain of past errors and are suckers for renewed empty promises. Hope for relief was particularly high in 2015 when an accomplished businessman, Mauricio Macri, ran for office at the end of the disastrous reign of Cristina Fernandez. He won the election, the first true conservative candidate to do so since the early 1940s. There were many people who then said, finally, the electorate has seen the light. However, although I wished all this might be true, on hearing the results of the election, I predicted that Mr. Macri would be a one-term only president. And he was. I'm not talking, the author of the thing is talking. If Mr. Macri were to usher in a new era of fiscal responsibility, he would need at least 2 terms of recovery to restabilize the country, then another 2 terms or more of prosperity for the lesson to sink in to build up the prosperity. And there's no chance that he could complete the task within 4 years. Consequently, he'd be voted out, and he was in 2019. The author terms this conundrum the wheat field principle. The same people who voted for redemption from a failed system will, in a subsequent election, reverse their vote. So how does this principle manifest itself? Well, the pundits who predict elections tend to imagine that the people of a country have a change of heart, and accordingly a change of leadership occurs. If not, the existing leadership remains. But this is never what actually occurs. Instead, any country will always have a hardcore conservative group, mostly employers and other business people, who almost invariably vote for the conservative candidate. It will also have the wage earners and the civil service people who have limited ability to increase their own income. They hope that a liberal leader will provide them with benefits they can create for themselves through their limited abilities and ambitions. The latter group almost invariably vote for the liberal candidate. In the middle are the percentage of the electorate, less than 25%, but often even less, who wave back and forth like a wheat field. When a liberal candidate makes empty promises to make life better, they vote liberal. But when those promises prove to be empty and the economy craters, the wheat field reluctantly votes conservative. The significance of all of this is that the wheat field has not ceased to want entitlements. In fact, they remain hopeful that entitlements can return. They're uninterested in why socialism doesn't work. They simply want to be told that things will be better this time. It's for this reason that time after time, the Argentine wheat field that voted for a return to fiscal responsibility in one election becomes the swing vote against the next election, returning the country once again to socialism. History shows that countries discard socialism only if it has brought the economy to the bottom and kept it there long enough for a fundamental change in thinking amongst an electorate. If not, the same wheat field that voted conservative in one election will blow the other way 4 years later, and that will be true in most any country. An editor's note: a government-led crisis is already underway in the U.S. and throughout the rest of the world. We just haven't seen it yet.